Your enterprise data strategy is sitting on a ticking time bomb. It's happening because your team keeps clicking that sync button. On the surface, it looks like a shortcut. It feels familiar. You see your files in File Explorer and you think you're in control of the data. But in reality, that assumption is the first step toward a fragmented nightmare. The reflex to sync is born from a desire for comfort. We want the world to look like the local folders we've used for decades. The problem is that the sync button is a legacy bridge. It's a tool built for a 2010 world that is trying to survive in a 2026 cloud-native reality. We aren't just moving files around, we are syncing technical debt and behavioral patterns that belong to the era of the old local file server. Understanding these shifts is the difference between a strategy that scales and one that breaks. If this changes how you think about your workspace, follow me, Mirko Peters, on LinkedIn. And if you want more of this, leave a review. It helps more people find the show. The architecture of fragmentation. The fundamental flaw in our current approach is a misunderstanding of what happens when that blue cloud icon appears in your taskbar. We tell users they are connecting to SharePoint, but the architectural reality is much more dangerous. Syncing doesn't move data. It replicates it. It creates a ghost model of your enterprise information. You aren't actually working on the file. You're working on a local replica that is constantly trying to whisper its changes back to a server. That server might be busy, it might be offline, or it might have already been updated by someone else. This is where the architecture of the modern workplace begins to crumble under the weight of legacy expectations. Every synced device becomes a new, unmanaged endpoint for data sprawl. In a world of 2026 security threats, we are taking our most sensitive assets and scattering them across thousands of local hard drives. Many of these devices aren't even compliant with our latest security rules. This is where the logic of your versioning begins to drift away from the source of truth. When you have 1,000 people syncing the same library, you don't have one library anymore. You have 1,001 libraries. The version on the server is the only one that actually matters, yet it's the one the user is the furthest away from. The source of authority becomes blurred. In a cloud-native system, the authority should be the service itself. It should be the relational database that manages your permissions, your labels, and your history. But when a user edits a local copy offline, the cloud version is temporarily orphaned. For those minutes or hours, the enterprise is blind. The system doesn't know what is changing. It can't apply real-time data loss prevention. It can't trigger the automated workflows that depend on that data. We built hierarchies for a world that no longer exists. And syncing forces those old hierarchies onto a cloud system designed for flat, contextual access. We are still trying to pretend that a SharePoint document library is just a Z drive with a fancy web interface. It isn't, it is a sophisticated content service. By syncing, we are stripping away the service and leaving only the content. It's like buying a Tesla and then trying to tow it with a horse. The result isn't a unified library, it's a collection of disconnected local caches waiting to collide. You see this every day when the sync issues window pops up. That window isn't a bug. It is the system screaming that its architecture is being violated. But here's the problem. We treat the sync client as a transparent pipe. In reality, it's a filter that strips away cloud-native intelligence. When data flows through that pipe to a local C drive, it loses its connection to the identity of the organization. It becomes a static object in a file system that was designed in the 1980s. Windows File Explorer doesn't understand sensitivity labels in the same way the browser does. It doesn't understand the complex relationship between a file and a Microsoft 365 group. It just sees bits and bytes. This fragmentation is silent. It doesn't break the system immediately. Instead, it slowly erodes the integrity of your data strategy until you realize that your source of truth is actually just a source of suggestions. You search for a document in the browser and find one version, but your colleague is looking at a completely different version in their local folder because their sync engine stalled 3 days ago. That is the moment the architecture fails. That is the moment your governance becomes a suggestion rather than a rule. We are trading the structural integrity of our information for the temporary comfort of a double click. We need to move past the ghost model and embrace the cloud as the only place where our work actually lives. Otherwise, we are just managing a massive distributed pile of digital debris. The metadata tax and versioning debt. When you map a SharePoint library to your local machine, you aren't just creating a simple shortcut. You are entering into a high-interest loan with your own data. I call this the metadata tax. It is the invisible cost of staying within the comfort of the File Explorer, and it is a price most organizations can't afford to pay. See, SharePoint is a relational database. It thrives on columns, custom tags, and managed properties that tell you who a document belongs to, what project it relates to, and how long it should be kept for compliance. But the moment you sync that file to your local drive, all that rich enterprise-grade context vanishes. Local file systems like NTFS or APFS don't speak the language of cloud-native columns. They speak the language of 1995. They understand date modified, file size, and file type, but that is where the conversation ends. When you work locally, you are blind to the why behind the data. You might be editing a document that has a draft status in SharePoint, but in your File Explorer, it looks identical to the final version. You are effectively stripping the intelligence off your assets and turning them into generic digital paper. This forces your team to resort to naming conventions like document v2, final actual, final docx, because the system can no longer help you differentiate between states. This leads us directly into the versioning debt nightmare. In the browser or the native Office apps, we have real-time co-authoring. We can see the presence of our colleagues, we can see the cursor moving, and the system handles the merge logic bit by bit. But the OneDrive Sync client operates on a much cruder level. It handles simultaneous edits by creating those computer-named duplicates that eventually clutter up your library. You've seen them. Budget, draft, marketing, laptop, 4.xlsx. This isn't collaboration. This is a collision. We have traded collective intelligence for a last one in wins race. If two people edit a synced file offline, the person who connects to the internet last is the one who risks overwriting the work of the first, or at best, creating a messy fork in the data. The local cache eventually tries to overwrite the cloud, and if the sync engine can't figure it out, it just dumps a copy and walks away. This creates a massive cleanup burden for IT and a trust gap for the users. They start asking, which file is the real one? And once that question is asked, your data strategy has already failed. So what is actually happening here? We are sacrificing the why of our data for the where of our folders. We are so obsessed with the location, the folder path, that we forget that the value of the information lies in its attributes. By staying in the File Explorer, you lose the ability to filter by project lead, you lose the ability to sort by expiration date, and you lose the ability to govern data through the browser's lens. You are essentially taking a high-definition movie and watching it on a black and white television because you like the shape of the remote. This debt compounds over time. Every conflict file created is a piece of data that isn't being managed. It isn't being indexed correctly, it isn't being protected by your retention policies, and it is just noise. And as the noise grows, the signal, your actual source of truth, gets weaker. We need to stop paying this tax. We need to stop pretending that the File Explorer is a neutral window. It is a legacy bottleneck. It is a place where metadata goes to die. If we want to build a strategy that actually works in 2026, we have to stop optimizing for the folder and start optimizing for the context. We have to move toward a model where the metadata stays attached to the file no matter where it is being viewed. That only happens when we stop syncing and start working where the service actually lives. The shortcut shift, a better governance model, and Microsoft is currently orchestrating a massive pivot toward a feature called Add Shortcut to OneDrive. On the surface, it looks like a minor UI tweak, just another way to get your files into the sidebar. But that is a surface-level interpretation. In reality, this is a fundamental shift in the underlying model of how enterprise data interacts with the local operating system. We are moving away from the era of replication and into the era of the cloud-managed pointer. You see, shortcuts aren't replicas. They don't copy the bits from the SharePoint document library into a separate local database on your machine. Instead, they act as a persistent cross-device link. When you add a shortcut, that link follows your identity. It doesn't matter if you sign in on your desktop, your laptop, or a mobile device. The shortcut is already there, waiting for you. This solves one of the most annoying operational hurdles of the old sync model: the per-device reconfiguration. In the old world, if a user got a new laptop, they had to sit there for 3 hours while the sync engine re-indexed 500,000 files. With shortcuts, the link is part of your profile. It's a leaner, faster, and more elegant way to maintain visibility without the performance penalty of a full metadata download on every single machine you touch. The 2026 roadmap makes the intention here very clear. Microsoft is moving toward a world of cloud-managed objects. In this vision, your desktop isn't a storage container anymore. It is just one of many windows into the same unified cloud-native pool. The operating system is becoming a thin client for the content service. This should be a dream for governance, right? We get the speed of local access with the control of the cloud. But here is the flaw that most architects are missing. Shortcuts introduce a deletion cascade that can be absolutely catastrophic for an unprepared organization. In the old sync model, if a user wanted to tidy up their local machine and deleted a folder, the sync client would usually ask if they wanted to remove it everywhere. But because shortcuts live inside the user's personal OneDrive space, the psychological boundary between my stuff and team stuff disappears. We are seeing cases where a user decides to clean up their OneDrive, sees a folder they don't recognize, and hits delete. Because that folder is a shortcut to a shared SharePoint library, the command propagates instantly. They aren't just deleting a link, they are wiping the actual files from the source for every single person in the company. It is a structural vulnerability masquerading as a convenience feature. Then there is the visibility gap. From an administrative standpoint, shortcuts are almost entirely opaque. Right now, IT admins have almost zero native oversight into who has added a shortcut to a sensitive library. If I sync a library, there are logs, there are heartbeats. But a shortcut is a user-driven action that leaves very little trail in the standard admin centers. We are essentially allowing users to create their own custom navigation paths into our most sensitive data silos without any centralized map of those connections. And one level deeper, we have to recognize that while shortcuts solve the performance bloat of the sync engine, they actually amplify the risk of accidental structural damage. When everything is nested under the OneDrive node in File Explorer, users start moving things around. They rename folders to suit their personal preferences, not realizing that those renames are changing the global namespace in SharePoint. We've moved the sync shortcut conflict from a technical error to a behavioral one. We are giving users a powerful tool to bridge the gap to the cloud, but we haven't given them the training to understand that they are now holding a live wire that connects directly to the heart of the enterprise. This shift requires a new governance model, one that moves away from locking down the button and toward managing the intent of the user. Security remnants and the unmanaged device. The real danger of the sync model isn't just about messy folders or lost metadata, it is about the physical residue you are leaving behind. In 2026, we have to talk about data at rest on the endpoint. When you click sync, you aren't just looking at the cloud, but you are pulling a literal bit-for-bit copy of enterprise intelligence onto a piece of hardware that you might not fully control. These remnants are the primary target for modern exfiltration. We have spent millions on firewalls and identity protection, but the moment that data hits a local hard drive, it enters a different jurisdiction. It is no longer protected by the real-time telemetry of the Microsoft 365 cloud, and instead, it sits there silent and static while waiting for someone to find it. Think back to the zero-day vulnerabilities we saw in 2025. Those attacks proved that a sophisticated adversary doesn't actually need to breach your SharePoint environment to steal your secrets. They don't need to bypass your complex conditional access policies or crack your global admin accounts. All they need is the local cache of a single synced user. Because we have made syncing so easy, we have essentially prepackaged our data for theft. If an attacker gains local administrative rights on a workstation, they don't have to fight the cloud, and they just have to scrape the OneDrive folder. The sync client has already done the hard work of authenticating, downloading, and decrypting the files for them. It is a buffet for data exfiltration served up on a silver platter. This is where the structural flaw becomes a massive security liability. Most organizations try to implement limited web-only access for unmanaged devices. The goal is simple. Let people see the data in a browser, but don't let them keep it. It is a great policy on paper. But the sync client is designed, by its very nature, to bypass this logic. It pulls full editable copies onto local hardware. If your governance doesn't explicitly block the use of the OneDrive client on unmanaged or non-compliant devices, you have a massive hole in your perimeter. You are effectively telling the world that your data is for eyes only, while simultaneously handing out photocopies to anyone who asks. This isn't just a configuration oversight, but it is a fundamental betrayal of the zero-trust philosophy. We tell ourselves that BitLocker is enough. We assume that if a device is lost or stolen, the encryption will hold. But in 2026, identity is the new perimeter, and a compromised identity can trigger a mass sync exfiltration that looks exactly like normal user traffic. If an attacker compromises a user's session, they can tell the sync engine to download everything. To your security operations center, this looks like a productive employee getting ready for a long flight. In reality, it is a silent drain of your intellectual property. We are building massive zero-trust perimeters with sophisticated gates, yet we have left a back door wide open through the sync engine. We are focusing on the front door while the sync client is busy moving the furniture out through the garage. The truth we have to face is that a synced folder is an invitation for data to live outside your governance perimeter. The moment a file is synced, your ability to track its lifecycle drops significantly. You can't see if it is being copied to a USB drive with the same granularity you have in the cloud. You can't easily revoke access to that specific local copy once the device goes offline. We are clinging to a model of convenience that is fundamentally incompatible with the threat landscape of today. We need to realize that the local cache isn't just a mirror, but it is a liability. Every byte synced is a byte you no longer truly govern. It is time to close the back door and bring our data back where it belongs, in the cloud, where we can actually see it and protect it. This isn't just about efficiency, but it is about survival in a cloud-native world. The 300,000 item ceiling. We have spent a lot of time talking about the invisible risks of the sync model, but now we need to talk about the physical wall. There is a hard mathematical limit to this architecture that most enterprises ignore until the moment their productivity actually grinds to a halt. I am talking about the 300,000 item threshold. This isn't a suggestion or a best practice buried in a help document, but it is a structural boundary of how local file system filters interact with massive cloud metadata sets. Once a library crosses a ceiling, the sync engine stops being a tool and starts being a parasite on your system resources. You have probably seen it happen. A user complains that their laptop is running hot, the fan is spinning at maximum speed, and their OneDrive icon has been stuck on processing changes for 3 days. This isn't a bug in the software, but it is the engine stalling. Every time a single file is changed in a massive library, The local sync client has to ping the cloud to reconcile the state of every other object in that set. When you have hundreds of thousands of files, those pings turn into a tidal wave of metadata traffic. Your CPU cycles are being consumed just to maintain the illusion that your local folder is up to date. This is the hidden tax of the sync model at scale. Most organizations don't even realize they are hitting this wall because they think in terms of gigabytes, not item counts. You can have a very small library in terms of storage that still breaks the sync engine because it is filled with millions of tiny log files or deep folder structures. The Windows File Explorer was never built to index a relational database with 500,000 entry points in real time. It was built for local disks. When we force it to act as a mirror for a massive SharePoint site, we are asking it to perform a task that is fundamentally incompatible with its design. This is where the transition to shortcuts becomes even more complex. Theoretically, shortcuts support up to 500,000 items. That sounds like a significant upgrade, right? But here is the catch that breaks most environments. The moment a user adds a shortcut to a library that they are already syncing, the whole system collapses into a silent error state. This is the sync shortcut conflict. It doesn't give you a clear warning. It doesn't tell you exactly what went wrong. It just stops. The library synchronization hangs, and the user is left working on stale data, completely unaware that their local view has become disconnected from the enterprise reality. You navigate your folders, you search for a file, and then the system simply stops responding. It can't reconcile a million tiny metadata pings while simultaneously managing the shortcut pointers. This architectural friction creates a massive support burden for IT teams who have to manually reset the OneDrive client, clear local caches, and hope the reconciliation works the second time. We are essentially building a digital house of cards, and every new file added to the library is another card that makes the whole structure more precarious. We have to stop treating SharePoint like an infinite bucket that we can just pour into our local machines. The sync model cannot scale to the size of the modern enterprise. If your data strategy depends on a tool that breaks once you reach a certain volume of work, then you don't actually have a strategy. You have a temporary workaround. We need to move away from the idea that we need a local copy of everything. We need to embrace the browser and the integrated app experience as the primary way we interact with data. That is the only way to bypass the 300,000 item ceiling and build a system that can actually grow with the organization. Otherwise, we are just waiting for the engine to fail. Transitioning to a cloud-native mindset. The goal here isn't just to disable a button or flip a switch in the admin center. If you hide the sync button without changing the culture, your users will find a way around it. They'll use third-party tools. They'll copy files manually. They'll create even more shadow IT. The real task is changing how your team perceives the location of their work. We have to break that 1990s habit of thinking work happens in a folder on a computer. In reality, work happens in a service. It happens in an ecosystem called Microsoft 365. This requires a shift toward inflow access. We need to train our people to use Teams as their primary interface for collaboration, and we need to show them the power of the SharePoint browser interface where metadata and version history actually live. Those sensitivity labels are invisible in File Explorer when you use the Office app as a unified jumping-off point. The where of the file becomes irrelevant because the context is always present. You aren't searching for a path, you're searching for an answer. For IT professionals, the mandate for 2026 is clear. We have to move away from legacy group policy objects that force sync or map drives because those are the tools of a world that no longer exists. Instead, we need to lean into Intune policies that enforce web-only access for sensitive data. We can use sensitivity labels to automatically block syncing on libraries that contain high-risk intellectual property, which isn't about being restrictive. It's about being responsible. Organizations that successfully abandon the sync button report a 30% drop in data-related support tickets within just 6 months. That is a massive efficiency gain. And it comes simply from aligning your behavior with the architecture of the cloud. The new model isn't about folders, it's about context. The value of our data lives in the cloud, protected by identity, governed by policy, and enriched by metadata. The File Explorer is a comfortable old shoe, but it wasn't made for the terrain we're crossing now. It's time to take it off. It's time to step into the cloud-native reality. We have to lead our teams away from the convenience trap and toward a strategy that is actually built to last. This is the shift from managing files to managing information. It is the only way forward. Stop treating SharePoint like a mapped drive. It is a relational database with a file-shaped interface. Your homework is clear. Audit your high-risk libraries today. Identify how many users are syncing sensitive data they haven't touched in 90 days because those local remnants are your greatest liability. If this perspective changed how you think about your information architecture, follow me, Mirko Peters, on LinkedIn for more structural clarity. Leave a review for the M365 FM podcast to help other architects find this signal in the noise. Shift your strategy from folders to context. The cloud is the only source of truth.